Hey there YouTube, That Canon Guys Reviews here, and today I decided I'm just going to go through a quick, unscripted kind of, overview on a couple of interesting cameras I've been working on, listing up on eBay recently, which that would be the Canon EOS Elan 7 series, and also one from my personal collection, the Canon EOS D30. And at first glance, these cameras might not look like they have much in common, but actually they have a lot more than you'd think, being mainly that the Canon EOS D30 was released in May of 2000, and the Elan 7 was released in October of 2000, so actually very similar in that. And also, interestingly, the EOS D30 doesn't seem quite similar to the EOS Elan 7E in name, but in Europe and other countries, the Elan 7 was actually known as the EOS 30. So definitely a lot more than meets the eye as far as similarities go between these two cameras. And of course, one is digital and the other is film. As you can see, I'm going through quite a few Elan cameras right now, basically getting them fully tested for listing on eBay. So far, all the different Elan 7s here have tested out. These are really durable cameras, and I'll go through that here in a minute. The build quality is really something else. One thing I would mention, there actually was a later model, the Canon EOS Elan 7N and 7NE, which came out a couple of years after this one, and was one of Canon's last film cameras they made. The differences between this model, the first one, and that one being a backlit LCD, ETTL2 flash support, and also a slightly different and improved autofocus system. One of the concerns I've seen mentioned online is actually where the cameras are made. This one, as you can see, is made in Japan. Apparently late model Canon Elan 7s and also all of the Canon Elan 7Ns were made in Taiwan, which whether or not that made a practical difference is definitely debated online, but from what I can tell, I would go with the Japan model ones here, just for the potential extra build quality and everything else. Okay, so let's go camera by camera here. I'll just give you a quick function overview. This isn't going to be super in-depth, and it's just going to be handheld, so one hand here. A little bit better camera quality than the last time, but not going to go in the light tent or anything this time. As you can see, here is the Canon EOS Elan 7E. The E stands for eye control. As you can see being advertised right there, which was basically a system that was introduced to a few earlier cameras and lasted until the 7NE, and allowed you to control the autofocus points with your eye. Wherever you're looking, the autofocus would focus, at least in theory. I haven't tried it out significantly, so I can't tell you exactly how effective that was. Before I've heard, it had pretty good reception. I think of it more as a gimmick, but for some other people, they seem to like it. Let's just take a look around the front of the camera here. As you can see, that large full-frame 35mm mirror right there. Also EOS Elan 7, eye control, Canon, and the original rubber grip right there. Also kind of an IR remote port, and also an AF help light right there. The bottom, they have this nice little grippy panel right here, and of course the grip right there. I definitely like that a little bit more than some of the other digital cameras here, which do not have that super grippy extra little panel right there. Holding in hand, I can tell you the Elan 7 is a really chunky and solid feeling camera compared to like the Elan 2 or A2E. Some of the previous cameras there, Canon came out of the 90s with some real plasticky cameras, and the Elan 7 was a really nice departure from that. Very solid feeling with the magnesium alloy body. And the D30 is very similar. The D30 definitely feels a bit thicker in the grip department compared to the Elan 7, which is quite a bit smaller. I'll do a weight comparison here in a minute. And also, if we look at the cameras side by side, you can definitely see where that digital technology has been squeezed into the D30 there. It's definitely a bit chunkier and larger body than the Elan 7. So I did mention that extra grip panel on the front. On the back, the Elan 7 does not have one of those, while the D30 does. So I guess it's just a little bit of a change up there. Looking at the back of the cameras, as you can see, those are actually the sensors for the eye control, and in most cameras, like this one right here, which hasn't been fully cleaned up yet, but as you can see the difference in finder design right below there, there's usually a cover over the eye control electronics, which in this case, that is missing for some reason. Let's take a look at the back of the camera. You have a bunch of different buttons on the Elan 7, definitely more than most film cameras. Function button, metering button, and film rewind. On-off for this dial here has a four-way control as well as the thumb dial. Going to the top here, I also have quite a few different controls. You can show the difference between a eye control model and a non-eye control model is basically that switch right there. If we go to a non-eye control model, as you can see, no switch right there. But other than that, it's going to be very familiar to a lot of your Canon shooters. Front shutter button there feels very similar to a lot of the DSLR shutter buttons, unlike the Elan series once again. Also the little thumb control wheel there for setting settings. And the little display, which I'll power on in a moment here to show you, has all these different settings right here. It definitely has a different control interface than the later DSLR cameras, likely just to cut down on power consumption because with all the digital stuff and the digital cameras there and the larger batteries, it could handle that. This one, on the other hand, could not handle it quite as well. But I also assume this thing has really good battery life. I haven't shot extensively with it, but it seems to be that way. As you can see right here, we have our standard kind of AF point selection and also our preview exposure / custom function button, which I haven't tested it, but I assume could be used for something like back button focus or some other things there. It does have custom functions, which is kind of unique over some other film cameras, aside from maybe some of the higher end ones of the time. Also have your mode dial there for one shot, AI focus, and AI servo. As it looks to be kind of a push-in lock on there, but there actually is no lock on this button. It feels very, very solid. It's definitely a metal switch and works very well. Going over to the other side of the camera here, obviously you see the flash hot shoe right there on the top, along with a flash unit, which this one can just be pulled up. There's no actual like flash release button as on the Elan 2, which I'll probably do an overview on that camera here in the future. But basically the previous version, or one of the previous versions of this one, I kind of think of the Elan 7 as like a Canon 7D. There was the EOS 1, EOS 5, EOS 3 above this one. This was the 7 in the lineup. Of course, they also classified it here as the EOS 30, which would put it more in line with that prosumer camera, which you could think of also as the early 7D. Okay, look at the top there, you'll see your mode dial, and also your diopter control on the viewfinder, and also your shooting mode thing there, which just does, I think, 4 frames per second in continuous, might be 5. I'll show you that here in a minute, and also look up to confirm the specification on that. So have your little focal plane indicator there, and on the mode dial, you actually have a lot more modes than you'd think would be on one of these cameras compared to like my 5D. This thing has quite a slew of modes, which include program, shutter priority, aperture priority, manual, and I think that's like defocus preview. Actually found out what that mode means recently, surprised I didn't know that before. And also the custom function setting mode. And you also have the scene mode, which would be portrait, landscape, macro, sports, and night portrait, which is kind of interesting on a film camera like this. Okay, so let's quickly look at the batteries this camera takes right here. There's the bottom of the camera. And let me kind of do a one-handed maneuver here to get the batteries out. As you can see them right down there. You will have to be careful with this battery cover. Those are not like the most fragile ever. I think they had them figured out by this point. But it is just a plastic hinge, and those will break off from time to time. And as you can see, I am actually using 2 Surefire flashlight batteries that work pretty well on this camera. Lithium CR123A type batteries. There also was an available power grip for this camera, though I don't have one of those on hand right now, and that would allow you to use AA batteries in addition to the CR123A batteries. Okay, before I power on the camera here, let's take a quick look in the film compartment. Not a lot to see there. Aside from just the door seals, pressure plate, all that kind of stuff. There's your film area there and your shutter right there. I want to always be careful in this area, obviously, because a finger through that shutter could be the end of it. And then I guess we can go on and power the camera up. Like I said, the 7N had the advantage of having a LCD light, which aided for setting settings in general and also in the dark. But as you can see, this thing's pretty sufficient. There is your data display. I'll go over and do a full overview on the D30 in a second here, but let me power that on and get that powering on. It does take a second. And let's take a look at this. Not going to go through each of these settings individually. I'll do that if I do a full review or overview on this camera. But as you can see, your settings are on the right, and you can page through those with the function button on the back and set them with either the control wheel or this wheel up there, depending on what setting you're setting. And also what mode you're in. So it'll display a wide variety of information, and obviously as your only screen on the camera, is going to be pretty essential in using this. Before I move on to the D30, one other big advantage I noticed on the Elan 7 compared to other film EOS cameras, which used a different autofocus chip, like the Elan 2 and other models for sure, a lot of the older film EOSs, is that this one I found no compatibility issues with aftermarket lenses. I have a lot of Tamron lenses. I have the 15-30, 70-200, and 150-600. And I noticed a lot of compatibility and autofocus issues on like the Elan 2 and 2E. Those lenses practically would not even work on those cameras, likely due to a different autofocus chipset, but they could work with the older Sigma lenses which had issues on newer Canon cameras. So I don't know, an update there, but the 7 does not have those issues. So if you have a big lineup of aftermarket Tamron or Sigma lenses, I'd say that this would be a much better bet, though I can't guarantee like perfect autofocus compatibility. It definitely worked 100% better than the Elan 2 or 2E. So if you're looking for older film EOS, I think that could be your ticket right there, which of course that's just in limited testing, but I'd say that's pretty indicative. Okay, so let's move on to the D30 here, do a quick overview of that. As you can see, there's the mirror in there, a bit smaller mirror. It doesn't seem quite as small as the later APS-C type mirrors, but this is obviously a 1.6 times crop sensor. And let me check the megapixel count here. I might do a whole video on this in the future because this has a lot of cool features and interesting things as Canon's first in-house produced Canon digital camera, also one of the first cameras that was commercially viable with a CMOS sensor of any sort of resolution. This camera has a lot of interesting things coming out in the year 2000, and it also had a 3.1 megapixel image sensor. I've personally taken some photos on this, and I can say just as long as you're not going to crop very much at all, this camera can take some really good shots. Also, ISO performance is not great. I'd say you're good up to about ISO 400. Anything above that's going to be pretty grainy. It's about half of the newest APS-C camera performance, but with that 3.1 megapixel sensor, it handles it pretty well. Just going on the front of the camera here, this also has a very nice magnesium alloy body. I'm not sure, I'd say it's about as solid feel as the Elan 7, but not quite as solid as like the 1D series or other cameras that came after it, like that. I have a couple of those myself, and those things are built like tanks. This thing is definitely pretty tank-like, but not quite to that same level of build, fit, and finish and all that. As you can see, you have a pretty large AF light right there, and also a really nice grip. I like the grip on this one a lot more than the Elan 7. It's a lot more reminiscent of something like the Elan 2E or similar older film grips, and also a lot of the newer digital grips. It is very, very chunky and very nice to hold. Not going to do a full overview here, like I said, but if you go to the side of the camera, you have a bunch of different ports, flash sync and remote ports. Also your USB and I believe an AV out port under there. You have a flash release button right there, and let's see if I have the camera powered on. That'll pop right up. It's not like a pull-up unit like the Elan 7 is. On the back of the camera, the LCD is not powered on right now, but it's a 1.8-inch LCD. There's your on-off switch, a lot different than the newer cameras. Menu, info, jump, magnification, and playback buttons. The one weird anomaly I've noticed on this camera, it might just be my cards, or it could be a whole variety of things. This thing will not zoom in and out in playback. It's just too slow. It crashes the camera every time I try. Other than that, I've had zero problems shooting photos with this, and it's actually a really nice camera to use for how old it is. I also have the delete button down there and the on-off switch for your thumb wheel right there, and also has a set button in the middle, unlike the Elan 7, which had the four-way control panel. And then on the side here, I actually like how chunky this compact flash card door is. It seems a lot sturdier than the later Canon cameras there. I don't think it's magnesium alloy, but it's definitely a higher quality plastic than some of those. And you have your single CF card slot in there. One thing you will encounter with the D30 over newer cameras is it will not accept higher capacity memory cards. I usually use a 1 gigabyte in here, and I'm not sure exactly the max capacity, but it's not a ton above that. Okay, looking at the top panel here, as you can see, I don't believe this one has a light on it either, which is kind of interesting to note, but you can see a bunch of different gauges there, quite a bit different from the Elan 7. Like I said, to save power, I believe they had to go for quite a bit more basic versions of all of these, but you have white balance and your quality settings, custom function, manual focus, and all that. And this is definitely a lot different than the later Canon EOS top displays. Just has a different profile, look, and all that. Which if you've seen the 5D and similar, this is definitely a little bit different, but it will be pretty familiar to any Canon shooter. Also has the traditional Canon shutter button, the selection wheel there, and you have your metering, drive, and AF/white balance modes on top, and the same autofocus selector and metering mode thing. In theory, with more points, I believe the Elan 7 has a better focusing system. This one only has 3 points. Well, as I showed before, the Elan 7 actually has a 5-point focusing system. Obviously not quite as refined as the later 9-point focusing system, but it works, and I generally use center point only, unless I'm doing sport or some other thing like that. And even then, I don't know. I don't use other points all that much. Also up here, you have your hot shoe, and right here, you have your mode dial, which is definitely a little bit of departure from the later cameras, or I should say, what's the word for departure that comes before? I don't know. It preceded the later mode dials. This one has a very, very solid feeling, and also pretty low profile mode dial compared to the later EOS cameras, but it has very recognizable modes on there. Also feels a lot more solid. I like the solid clicks on it. I'm pretty sure people just didn't like the low profile design, and that's why they changed it. Also, a bit of a concave feel right there, which is kind of odd. As for viewfinder, it definitely has quite a bit smaller viewfinder than the Elan 7, being APS-C rather than full frame, but it's just as big as any other APS-C camera, and I believe it's a pentaprism finder, which makes it nice and bright. Okay, so not going to do too much more as far as function overview goes here, but let's just compare the shutter sounds on the cameras. I think that might be interesting. Set this to manual right here, and I'll put it, let's just go 1/60th of a second. Let's put it up close to the microphone. There's your D30. Let's change Elan 7 to 1/60th right here. And there's your Elan 7. So definitely quite a bit different in the shutter sound department. But obviously the Elan 7 has a full frame mirror and shutter, while the D30 has an APS-C one. Try one more time. I'm not sure if this originally had that much shutter whine. I definitely do hear a bit of shutter squeal / shutter whine coming out of the D30. Okay, well definitely a bit of a different video today. Let me know with any constructive criticism and comments you'd have in the comment section below. Ask away with any questions on either one of these cameras, and I may do a full overview or maybe even a full review, especially on like the D30, which is one of my personal cameras, and really liking that one right now. Obviously some interesting history as Canon's first digital SLR camera, and then of course the Elan 7E is a well-renowned film camera. I just decided today was the time to do a quick video on them because I have them all lined up here, and these are going to be listed up on my eBay store coming up very shortly. That is just that_Canon_guy, as you could infer from my username. I have a few thousand items listed on there, including some interesting cameras like this, but a lot more accessories and lenses and that kind of stuff, mainly dealing in the 60s to 90s. But like I said, had a pretty big lot through here, and that's not even all of them. There's a few more here. And I also might want to do an overview on the A2E at some point. That's a really cool camera that came out of that same era. I believe that one came out in 95 or something like that. Could be a little bit off on that. Also known as the EOS 5. So kind of the predecessor to the 5D. Maybe I could do a comparison between those two. But regardless, that's going to be about it for this video today. Like I said, leave a comment in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And stay tuned for more in the future. You can also drop, if you have any suggestions for videos. I have a lot of cameras to go through here in the future, so I don't think I'll have a lack of videos for very long. I just picked up a cool Canon G6 as a camera I really wanted for a long time, and just picked one of those up for $20. A Canon PowerShot G3, G2, and an S10 back in there, as well as my first digital camera, the Canon S2IS, which I might go and do a re-review on that. I've actually been getting into film photography a little bit lately, which surprisingly, I haven't shot a lot of film throughout the years. I definitely test a lot of film cameras, and I know a bit about it, but I haven't shot a lot, so I'm going to try and shoot a bunch of rolls to this Yashica FR1, which is pretty cool, very solid. And then, of course, I have a Pentax Q down in there, which that thing is super awesome. Wanted one of those for a while, so I have one now. Just kind of building my digital camera collection. Olympus eVolt E330 is actually one of my two main product photography cameras. That thing works really well. I didn't want to keep wearing out the shutter on my 1DS and 5D, so I decided to start going for the Olympus ones here. I have this lens here, which actually has super glue the aperture to about f5.6 because the aperture control mechanism was broken. So I was able to do a bit of a field repair there and get that working for my purposes. Got a great deal on it as a parts lens like that. Also a couple here that are in flux. Most of these are parts cameras coming off the testing table there, Elan 2s. And this is actually Olympus E500, which is a really cool one right there. This is the last of Olympus's CCD sensor 4/3 cameras. I'm really getting into the 4/3 cameras lately. They're really affordable and really cool. I'd like to get an E3 or E5 at some point. And then some Digital Rebels back in there, which not exactly the one that I reviewed the other day. That one's actually listed separately, but these two also work and are going to be listed up here fairly soon once I get a battery charger ordered for them. If we go up here, see my Canon 5D, a Nikon D100, which I started using. I haven't used a lot of Nikon cameras. This one's obviously a little bit older one, but I want to try one of their CCD sensor cameras to see how good that is. And there's my main kind of video camera, and also use it for lens adaptation, EOS Rebel SL1. And then back here, another E500. This is actually the one I'm keeping. This one has bent pins in the CF card slot, so you can only use XD picture cards, which, oh man, that's kind of a hassle, but it's definitely cool for the deal I got on it. And this one down here is going to be for sale since it works fully. There's some pretty crazy lenses back in there. Okay, I'm rambling. That Canon Guys Review's out. Goodbye. Thanks for watching.